The Forgotten Path. It was supposed to be a simple trip, a weekend getaway, just 5 of us looking for a little adventure. Jason had been obsessing over an old map he found in his grandpa's attic, a map of a town none of us had ever heard of, hidden deep within a forest that time had forgotten. Crescent Grove, the faded letters read. None of us had seen it on any modern map, but that only added to the allure. "We should go," Jason had said, his eyes gleaming with the excitement of uncovering something unknown. Who knows what's still there? We were intrigued, Ryan, Sarah, Chloe, and I. We were the type to seek out the strange and the mysterious, so the idea of exploring a forgotten city felt like a challenge we couldn't resist. The thought of abandoned buildings, lost relics, and perhaps a story to tell once we returned was all we needed to pack our bags and head out. It wasn't hard to find the entrance to the forest, though it was clear that no one had ventured there in years. The trees were dense, their branches intertwining like skeletal fingers, creating a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. The path was narrow, overgrown with weeds and underbrush, and the air carried a heavy damp scent that spoke of neglect and secrets. "Are we sure this is a good idea?" Sarah asked as we hiked deeper into the forest, the excitement in her voice tinged with apprehension. "Relax, Sarah. This is going to be epic," Ryan reassured her, his usual cocky grin in place. After what felt like hours, the trees began to thin, revealing the outskirts of what must have been Crescent Grove. The town was eerily silent, the kind of silence that presses in on you, making every footstep sound unnaturally loud. The buildings, once quaint, were now decrepit, their wooden frames rotting, windows shattered, and doors hanging from rusted hinges. But it wasn't the decay that made us pause, it was the sense that we were being watched. "I don't like this," Chloe murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. She was usually the bravest of us all, but there was something in her tone that made my skin crawl. "Let's just find somewhere to set up camp for the night," Jason suggested, though he sounded less certain than before. We picked our way through the rubble, passing what must have been a general store, its sign swinging gently in the wind that had started to pick up. As we moved further into the town, something caught my eye, a building that seemed different from the others. It was larger, with darkened windows that reflected nothing. A sign above the door read, "Wonders and Whispers," the lettering ornate and faded, but still legible. "Let's check it out," Jason said, already moving toward the door. "No way," I said, grabbing his arm. "We need to be careful. Who knows what's in there?" "Exactly," Jason replied with a grin. "That's why we're here, right?" Reluctantly, we all followed him inside. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of old wood and something else, something metallic, clung to the back of my throat. The store was filled with shelves upon shelves of items, each stranger than the last. Old clocks that didn't tick, jars filled with cloudy liquid, and books with titles and languages I couldn't recognize. "Guys, look at this," Ryan called out from the back of the store. We gathered around him, our footsteps echoing in the hollow space. Ryan was holding up a small, ornate box, the wood dark and polished, with a lock that looked like it had never been opened. "I bet there's something valuable in here," he said, his eyes gleaming. Before anyone could stop him, Ryan forced the box open, the lock breaking with a loud snap. The moment it opened, the atmosphere in the room shifted, the air grew colder, and the light from outside seemed to dim, as if the sun had decided to hide. What's that?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Inside the box was a small, intricately carved wooden figure, but its features were twisted, almost demonic. The figure seemed to be grinning, its eyes dark hollows that seemed to suck in the light around it. Suddenly, the door to the store slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. We all jumped, fear gripping us as we realized the temperature had dropped even more. "I think we should leave," Chloe said, her voice barely audible. But as we turned to head for the door, the figure in the box began to move, its head slowly turning to face us. A low, guttural whisper filled the room, though none of us could understand the words. Then, the floor beneath us creaked, and we heard something else, a scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across the floor above us. We looked up in unison, our hearts pounding in our chests. That's when we heard it, a faint, rhythmic thumping, growing louder and louder as whatever it was made its way down the stairs. We were not alone. The thumping grew louder, more deliberate, like the heartbeat of something monstrous hidden within the store's depths. We stood frozen, eyes locked on the staircase at the back of the room, where the sound was coming from. Every instinct screamed to run, but our feet refused to obey, as if the store itself was holding us in place. Then, with a creak that echoed through the empty store, the door at the top of the stairs slowly swung open. Darkness spilled out, thick and suffocating, and with it came a smell, something rotten, decaying, like meat left out in the sun for far too long. "We need to get out of here now." Chloe's voice cut through the terror, jolting us back to reality. Without waiting for a response, she bolted toward the front door, pulling with all her might, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if the wood and metal had fused together, locking us inside. "Help me!" she screamed, her voice cracking with panic. Ryan and I rushed over, slamming our shoulders into the door, but it was no use. The store had us trapped. Behind us, the thumping reached the bottom of the stairs. We didn't dare look back. "This way," Jason shouted, pointing to a door on the side of the store that we hadn't noticed before. With no other options, we sprinted across the room. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into the basement. A cold, damp breeze wafted up from below, carrying with it the same putrid smell that filled the store. "Are you crazy?" Sarah cried, grabbing Jason's arm. "We can't go down there. Do you want to stay up here and find out what's coming for us?" Jason snapped back, fear lacing his words. Sarah hesitated for just a moment, then nodded, tears streaming down her face. One by one, we descended the stairs, the darkness swallowing us whole. The steps were uneven, each one groaning under our weight. I could hear our breath, quick and shallow, mixing with the quiet sobs that Sarah tried to stifle. As we reached the bottom, a dim light flickered to life, illuminating a sprawling basement filled with old crates, broken furniture, and more of those strange, unmarked jars. The walls were made of rough stone, and the air was so cold that I could see my breath. But there was something else down here with us. I heard it first, a low, wet slither, like something dragging itself across the floor. The sound sent chills down my spine, and I turned slowly, the others following my gaze. In the far corner of the basement, where the light barely reached, something moved. It was a mass of writhing flesh, a nightmare given form. Limbs that shouldn't exist twisted and contorted as it dragged itself closer. Its eyes, or what passed for them, were hollow pits, glowing with a sickly yellow light. And its mouth was a gaping void, lined with rows of jagged teeth that seemed to stretch on forever. "Oh my God!" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. The creature let out a guttural growl, the sound reverberating through the basement walls. It moved faster now, driven by the scent of our fear, and we realized we had no choice but to run. "Go! Go!" Jason shouted, pushing us toward the opposite side of the basement, where another door stood half-hidden behind a stack of rotting crates. We sprinted, the monster closing in behind us, its heavy, wet body slamming into the walls as it gave chase. I could hear it breathing, a rasping, hungry sound that grew louder with every step. My heart pounded in my chest, adrenaline flooding my veins as we reached the door. Jason yanked it open, and we spilled into a narrow tunnel that led deeper underground. The walls were rough, carved from the earth itself, and the ceiling was so low that we had to crouch to move forward. We scrambled through the darkness, the creature's growls echoing behind us, growing more frenzied by the second. The tunnel twisted and turned, branching off into different directions, each path looking more treacherous than the last. We didn't have time to choose carefully. Every second we wasted brought the monster closer. "This way!" Ryan shouted, choosing a tunnel at random and diving into it. We followed, the walls pressing in on us as the space grew even tighter. The smell of decay was overwhelming now, making it hard to breathe, but we couldn't stop. The tunnel opened into a small chamber, and for a moment, I thought we had found an escape. But there was no way out. The chamber was a dead end, its walls slick with moisture and something darker, something that glistened like oil in the dim light. We were trapped. "We can't stay here," Chloe cried, backing away from the walls as if they might reach out and grab her. The growling grew louder, filling the chamber as the creature dragged itself into the tunnel behind us. We huddled together, terror gripping us as we realized there was no escape. "I'm sorry," Jason whispered, his voice breaking. And then the creature was upon us. With a deafening roar, it lunged forward, its jaws snapping shut just inches from where we stood. We scattered, each of us scrambling to get as far away from the monster as possible, but there was nowhere to go. The creature struck again, its massive body slamming into the walls, causing the entire chamber to shake. I could hear the others screaming, their voices blending with the creature's enraged roars, but I couldn't see them. The darkness was too thick, too complete. And then, as if the earth itself had taken pity on us, the wall behind me crumbled, revealing a narrow passage. I didn't think, I just ran, squeezing through the gap and into the darkness beyond. I heard the others following, their footsteps close behind, and the creature's roar of frustration as it realized we had slipped away. We ran through the passage, our legs burning, our breath ragged. The tunnel seemed endless, twisting and turning until I lost all sense of direction. But finally, up ahead, I saw a faint light. We burst through the tunnel's mouth and into the open air, collapsing onto the cold, damp ground. We were outside, back in the forest, the twisted trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. But there was no relief in our escape. The creature's roars still echoed in our ears, and the terror that gripped us was far from over. We were safe, for now. But as we looked around, we realized something was wrong. The forest was darker, the trees more twisted than before, and the path we had taken to Crescent Grove was nowhere to be found. We were lost, trapped in a place that wasn't on any map, pursued by a creature that shouldn't exist. And something told me that it wasn't finished with us yet. We didn't know how long we had been running. Time seemed to blur as we stumbled through the forest, the twisted trees closing in around us like a labyrinth with no end. The sun had long disappeared, leaving us in near total darkness, the only light coming from the dim glow of the moon that barely penetrated the thick canopy above. Which way now? Chloe's voice was hoarse, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she leaned against a tree, trying to catch her breath. I don't know, Jason admitted, his voice filled with a mixture of frustration and fear. The map he had once been so confident about was now useless, the forest's layout defying any logic or pattern. The more we walked, the more disoriented we became, the trees seeming to shift and change as if the forest itself was alive, toying with us. We can't just keep wandering like this, Sarah said, her voice trembling. We need to find shelter or... A rustling sound in the distance cut her off, sending a wave of fresh panic through us. We all fell silent, listening intently, but the forest was eerily still. Too still. It was as if the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting. Do you hear that? Ryan whispered, his eyes darting around as if expecting something to leap out from the shadows. But it wasn't what we heard that terrified us, it was what we didn't. The silence had become oppressive, swallowing up even the faintest sounds of the forest. There were no birds, no insects, nothing. Just the wind whispering through the leaves, carrying with it the faint scent of decay that seemed to cling to our skin. Let's keep moving, Jason said, trying to keep the fear out of his voice. We'll find a way out. But we all knew it was a lie. The forest had changed, twisted into something unfamiliar, something dangerous. And deep down, we all sensed that there was no way out. Not this time. We walked for what felt like hours, our exhaustion growing with every step. The trees loomed overhead, their branches intertwining to form a canopy so thick that it blotted out the stars. The path beneath our feet was uneven, the ground soft and treacherous, as if the forest itself was trying to swallow us whole. And then, just when I thought we couldn't go any further, we heard it, a low hum, faint at first but growing louder. The sound was mechanical, foreign to the natural silence of the forest, and it sent a shiver down my spine. What is that? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We followed the sound, our pace quickening despite our exhaustion. As we moved deeper into the forest, the trees began to thin, and the ground beneath our feet grew firmer. The hum grew louder, accompanied by the rhythmic thumping of rotor blades slicing through the air. A helicopter. Over here, Jason shouted, his voice filled with desperate hope as he broke into a run, crashing through the underbrush. We followed him, the hum now a roar as the helicopter came into view, hovering just above a clearing up ahead. The sight of it was surreal, its floodlights cutting through the darkness, illuminating the twisted trees and the ground below. The blades whipped the air into a frenzy, causing the leaves and dirt to swirl around us as we ran toward it. As we neared the clearing, I saw them, figures in dark uniforms, their faces obscured by helmets and visors. Soldiers. They were armed, their rifles raised as they scanned the perimeter, their movements precise and methodical. But it wasn't the soldiers that caught my attention. It was the man standing at the edge of the clearing, watching us with an expression that was impossible to read. It was Jason's grandfather. "Grandpa!" Jason's voice was filled with shock and confusion as he skidded to a stop, staring at the old man who should have been hundreds of miles away, safe in his home. The grandfather's face was stern, his eyes hard as he took in our disheveled appearance, the fear etched into our faces. "Get in the helicopter," he said, his voice commanding, leaving no room for argument. "But," Jason started to say, but his grandfather cut him off with a sharp gesture. "No." Without another word, we obeyed, scrambling into the helicopter as the soldiers formed a protective perimeter around us. The inside of the helicopter was cramped, filled with equipment and more soldiers, their expressions hidden behind their visors. The door slammed shut behind us, sealing us inside as the helicopter lifted off, the ground falling away beneath us. We were safe, but the terror that had gripped us in the forest hadn't left. It clung to us, a cold, creeping sensation that something wasn't right. "Grandpa, what's going on?" Jason asked, his voice shaking as he stared at the old man, who had taken a seat across from us. His grandfather's face was unreadable, his eyes fixed on something far away. "You shouldn't have gone to Crescent Grove," he said, his tone flat, emotionless. "What do you mean? How did you even know we were there?" Jason pressed, but his grandfather didn't answer. Instead, he turned to one of the soldiers, giving a curt nod. The soldier stepped forward, pulling a small vial from a pouch on his belt. "Hold still," he said, his voice muffled by the helmet as he reached for Jason's arm. "What are you doing?" Jason tried to pull away, but the soldier was quick, injecting the contents of the vial into Jason's arm before any of us could react. "What the hell?" Ryan shouted, standing up, but two soldiers quickly restrained him, their grips like iron. "It's for your own good," Jason's grandfather said, his voice cold. "For all of you." I felt a sharp prick in my arm, and before I could react, a wave of dizziness washed over me. My vision blurred, the faces around me becoming indistinct shapes, and the roar of the helicopter's blades faded into a dull hum. What's happening?" Chloe's voice was slurred, her words blending together as she struggled to stay conscious. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was Jason's grandfather, his expression unchanged, as if he had been expecting this all along. As the darkness swallowed me, one thought echoed through my mind, over and over again. What had we unleashed?